All right, so, ¿cómo funciona el lenguaje? You hit the nail on the head with that one.
It really is a fascinating question, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like we're about to unlock some linguistic treasure chest here.
Yeah.
And you know me, I'm always up for a good deep dive.
Well, get ready because today we're diving headfirst into the world of linguistics.
I am so ready.
We're going to break down what linguistics actually is and why it's so important. And who knows, we might even uncover some secrets about how our brains make sense of this whole language thing.
Okay, so to kick things off, for anyone who might be new to this whole linguistics thing, can we start with the basics? What exactly are we talking about when we say linguistics?
You got it. Linguistics, at its core, is the scientific study of language. And when I say scientific, I mean we're looking at language objectively, systematically. It's like being a detective, but for language.
Ooh, a language detective. I like that.
Right. We're interested in the origins of language, how it evolved over time, the nuts and bolts of its structure, and how it varies across different cultures and communities.
It's amazing how one thing, language, can be so incredibly complex.
Exactly. And just like any good detective story, linguistics is full of twists and turns, unsolved mysteries, and constant aha moments. I mean, just think about it. Every time you open your mouth to speak, or you read a text message, or you even just think to yourself, you're engaging in this incredibly complex process that we're only just beginning to understand.
That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way. So we've got this big overarching field of linguistics, but where do we even begin to break that down? Our source mentioned phonetics and phonology. What are those all about?
Good catch. Those are some pretty core areas of linguistics. Let's start with phonetics. That's all about the sounds of language. We're talking about the physical process of how we produce and perceive speech sounds, like how your tongue, teeth, lips, and vocal cords all work together to make those sounds we recognize as vowels and consonants.
Wow. It's actually kind of mind-blowing when you think about the mechanics behind it all.
Okay.
So that's phonetics. But what about phonology? How do those two differ?
You're right, it's all connected. Now, phonology takes a step back and looks at the bigger picture of sound in a language. Think of it like this. Phonetics is like studying the individual ingredients in a recipe, the flour, the sugar, the spices. Phonology is understanding how those ingredients work together to create the final dish.
Okay, that's a really good analogy. So phonology is about the patterns and rules, right?
Exactly. It's about how sounds interact, how they change depending on their position in a word or sentence, and how those patterns create meaning.
That actually explains so much about why different languages and accents can sound so distinct. It's like they're playing by a slightly different set of sound rules.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes linguistics so fascinating.
It really is. Okay, so we've talked about the sounds, but what about the structure of language? You know, the whole grammar side of things. I think our source mentioned something called morphosyntax.
You're on a roll today. Yes, morphosyntax is all about how we build words and sentences. It's essentially the architecture of language, but instead of bricks and mortar, we're dealing with things like morphemes and syntax.
Morphemes. Now, those sound familiar. Remind me what those are again.
Happy to. Morphemes are like the Lego blocks of meaning in language. They're the smallest units that carry meaning, like prefixes, suffixes, and root words.
Right. Okay, I remember now. So we've got these little building blocks of meaning. How does syntax fit in?
Syntax is like the instruction manual that tells us how to put those morphemes together to form grammatically correct phrases and sentences. It's the set of rules that dictate word order and how different parts of a sentence relate to each other.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm guessing this is where things can get really tricky, right? Because different languages have different rules about word order and sentence structure.
Absolutely. The beauty and the challenge of language. And that's exactly what linguists who specialize in syntax spend their time figuring out the rules that govern how we arrange words to convey meaning.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've covered sounds and structure. But what about the heart of it all, the meaning? That's got to be where things get really interesting, right?
You're talking about semantics and pragmatics now, and you're right, this is where language really comes to life. Semantics focuses on the literal meanings of words and how they combine to form larger units of meaning, like phrases and sentences.
So like how the word cat refers to that furry four-legged creature that may or may not be judging us right now.
Exactly. But then there's pragmatics, which takes context into account. It looks at how we use language in different social situations, how we interpret implied meanings, and how our understanding of a sentence can change based on who's speaking, who they're speaking to, and what the overall situation is.
So pragmatics is all about reading between the lines.
Exactly. It's about understanding that what we say and what we mean aren't always the same thing, and that language is full of nuance and subtext.
So someone asked me, is that your car? When I park, it might not be a genuine question, but a comment on my terrible parking skills.
Exactly. It's all about context and how we use language to navigate the social world around us.
This is fascinating. So we're really starting to paint a picture of how language works. Now, in our research for this deep dive, we came across someone named Ferdinand de Saussure. It sounds like he was a pretty big deal in the world of linguistics. What was his contribution?
Ah, so sure. You can't talk about linguistics without mentioning him. He was a Swiss linguist who really shook things up in the field back in the early 20th century.
What made his work so groundbreaking?
Well, before Saussure, people mostly thought of language as this tool we use to reflect or describe the world around us, just putting labels on things. But Saussure, he proposed a radically different view. He argued that language doesn't just reflect reality, it actually shapes how we perceive it. He said that language is a system of signs, and each sign is made up of two parts: a signifier, which is the word itself, the sound or the written form, and the signified, which is the concept or idea that the word represents.
So the word tree is a signifier, and the actual physical tree in my backyard is the signified.
Exactly. But Saussure's big point was that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. It's not like there's some natural connection between the word tree and the actual tree. It's just something that we as a language community have agreed on.
That's so interesting. So it's like language is this kind of shared code that we all agree to use.
Exactly. And Saussure believed that this code, this system of signs, doesn't just allow us to talk about the world, it actually influences how we think about the world. It shapes our categories, our perceptions, and even our understanding of reality itself.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful idea. He really changed the game for how we understand language.
He really did. His ideas formed the basis for what we now call structuralism, which has had a massive influence not just on linguistics, but on fields like anthropology, literary theory, and even psychology.
It's amazing how these ideas can ripple out and impact so many different fields. So we've talked about all these amazing aspects of linguistics, but let's get practical. How is this knowledge actually used in the real world? What do linguists actually do with all of this information?
That's a great question. There's this misconception that linguistics is just about memorizing grammar rules or studying bed languages, but in reality, it's so much more than that.
Okay, good. So what are some real-world applications of linguistics?
Well, for starters, there's theoretical linguistics, where researchers are constantly digging deeper into the mysteries of language. How did language evolve? What are the universal principles that underlie all languages? How does the brain process language?
So the big questions.
Exactly. Then, on the flip side, you have applied linguistics, which takes all of that theoretical knowledge and puts it into practice in various fields.
Like what? What are some examples of applied linguistics in action?
Oh, there are tons. For example, you have educational linguists who work on developing more effective language teaching methods, creating materials for second language learners, and addressing things like language disorders and literacy challenges. Then, there are computational linguists who are at the forefront of artificial intelligence.
Okay, yeah. We're seeing the impact of that everywhere these days.
Exactly. They're developing things like machine translation software, voice recognition systems, and those chatbots that seem to be getting smarter by the day.
That's incredible. It's
Yeah.
amazing to see how linguistics is playing such a crucial role in shaping our technological world.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to education and technology. You have forensic linguists who analyze language in legal contexts, helping to solve crimes or settle disputes. There are also clinical linguists who work with people with speech and language disorders, helping them to communicate more effectively. The list goes on and on.
Wow, that is a lot. Before we started this deep dive, I kind of had this narrow view of what linguistics was all about. But it's clear that it touches so many different aspects of our lives.
It really does. Think about it this way. Every time you send a text message, watch a movie, or even just think to yourself, there's a whole universe of linguistics happening behind the scenes.
I'm definitely going to be looking at all of that differently now. And speaking of looking at things differently, our source touched upon the fact that language is constantly changing. So here's a thought to leave you with. How do you think technology, particularly in our increasingly digital world, is shaping the way we communicate today? What new words, phrases, or even entire ways of speaking have emerged because of how we interact with technology? It's a fascinating question that linguists are grappling with right now, and it's something I'm sure you have your own unique insights on too.
Keep those linguistic gears turning, everyone.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep that linguistic curiosity alive.